Let's dive into the mind of a man who wasn't just writing science fiction. No, he was, in a very real way, a prophet for the strange, paranoid world we're all living in right now. Just imagine, for a second, a world where you can't be sure if your neighbor, your boss, or maybe even the person you love is actually human. A world filled with synthetic copies that are absolutely perfect. Or how about this? You're living in an America where the Nazis and Imperial Japan actually won World War II. And the history that you and I know? It's just a piece of forbidden underground fiction. What if you could be arrested, tried, and locked away for a murder you haven't even committed yet, all based on a psychic's premonition? All of these incredible, reality-shattering ideas, where in the world did they come from? Well, they all sprang from the mind of one single person. That man was Philip K. Dick. And trust me, if you're a fan of modern sci-fi, you already know his work, even if you don't recognize his name. Seriously, his imagination is like the source code for some of our biggest cultural hits. We're talking about the rain-soaked dystopia of Blade Runner, the wild, mind-bending action of Total Recall and Minority Report. His alternate history became the massive hit show The Man in the High Castle, and his paranoid, tech-anxious DNA is just all over modern classics like Black Mirror. So who was this guy who basically dreamed up our future? Well, to really get his work, you first have to understand his chaotic, brilliant, and deeply troubled life. Philip K. Dick's life was just a whirlwind of frantic creation. I mean, the man published over 40 novels and tons of short stories, mostly while nobody was paying attention. Then, in 1974, something bizarre happened. He had this mystical vision, believing some higher intelligence was talking to him through a pink beam of light. Yeah, and that event would totally dominate his later work. And in a really tragic twist, after a lifetime of struggling, he died at just 53 years old, only months before Blade Runner hit theaters and finally made him a household name. You see, his creativity was basically fueled by his personal chaos. He was always broke, he went through 5 marriages, and he battled severe anxiety his entire life. He had this intense paranoia. He was convinced that government agencies were watching his every move, which, to be fair, wasn't completely crazy, given the whole Cold War vibe and FBI surveillance back then. But this personal anxiety, it wasn't a bug in his system, it was the main feature. It became the engine for the shadowy, conspiratorial worlds he was so incredibly good at building. And all that personal turmoil? It feeds directly into the philosophical heart of his work. Because more than anything else, Philip K. Dick was obsessed with one single, terrifying question. And that question was, what is real? This is it. This is his central theme. His characters are constantly getting thrown into these situations where the line between what's real and what's some kind of simulation or illusion just completely dissolves. And they and you, the reader, are just left floating, totally unmoored. He just relentlessly hammered away at these huge existential questions. How can we possibly know what's real? Who's really pulling the strings? What does it even mean to be human in a world full of perfect fakes? And are any of us actually free? Or are we all just pieces being moved around in someone else's giant, invisible game? And he used his stories almost like a laboratory to play with these complex ideas. He'd take a question like, what if history was different? And boom, you get The Man in the High Castle. He'd ask, what defines humanity? And explore it through his androids. He dove deep into surveillance culture with A Scanner Darkly, and even tackled what happens after we die in the famously bizarre novel Ubik. Okay, and this is where it gets really startling. His paranoid visions from way back in the mid-20th century, they didn't just stay on the page. In so many ways, they became a blueprint for our world today. He wrote about worlds that weren't controlled by governments, but by massive manipulative corporations. Sound familiar? Yeah. Today, we live in a world where a tiny handful of tech megacorporations have a staggering amount of influence on the news we see, the things we buy, and maybe even the way we think. The man's foresight was just incredible. In books like The 3 Stigmata of Palmar Eldritch, his characters would use technology to escape their miserable lives by plugging into these shared, manufactured realities. Today, we just call that virtual reality and the metaverse. He saw coming more than 50 years ago. So what this all really boils down to is that decades before anyone even came up with the term, Philip K. Dick was the poet's laureate of the post-truth world, a world where subjective feelings and carefully crafted narratives can feel more real and be more powerful than objective reality itself. Which, of course, leads us to the big takeaway here. His work doesn't just let us sit back and watch. It forces us to turn that suspicious lens back onto our own lives. When you look at it, his legacy is just immense. He's one of the key architects of the sci-fi movies we all love. He gave us the language to even talk about our anxieties with AI, surveillance, and virtual worlds. But the most important thing is that the profound questions he was asking, they're not just still relevant. They feel more urgent with every single passing day. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with one final, deeply unsettling thought that really gets to the core of everything he was about. Just look around you for a second. At your room, your screen, your life. How can you be absolutely 100% certain that any of it is real? How do you know your entire reality isn't just a very convincing, very elaborate dream being dreamt by someone or something else?